Welcome to our episode of Biblical Archaeology, From the Ground Down. Presented by Bible Interact and hosted by Dr. George Sparks. Join us as we explore the fascinating world of the Bible from leading experts in the field of archaeology.
Hello everyone, I'm Dr. David Graves, an experienced biblical archaeologist and CEO of Electronic Christian Media. I'm here today with another exciting episode on our Archaeology Discoveries channel, where we discuss important archaeological artifacts related to the Bible. Thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe to our channel.
Well, welcome people. My name is Dr. George Sparks, and this is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. My special guest today is Dr. David Graves. Dr. David Graves received his PhD from the University of Aberdeen, Scotland. He's a native of Canada, has been involved in teaching the Bible and archaeology for more than 35 years. Retired assistant professor from Liberty University, Rawlings School of Divinity in Lynchburg, Virginia. He has taught archaeology at Oxford University, England, provided tours at the Ashmolean as well as the British Museum, traveled extensively in the Middle East, been involved in the Mount Ararat research, and also a consultant to the National Geographic Productions. He has been involved in archaeology excavations at Qumran, the Temple Mount, as well as Shiloh, all in Israel, as well as Tel El Hammam in Jordan. In 2017, he was part of a team that excavated the Dead Sea Scroll Cave 53, in which they identified as once holding scrolls, now identified as Qumran 12, cave number 12. He is also a member of the Near Eastern Archaeological Society, NEAS. He has authored a number of books published through his company, Electronic Christian Media, ECM. In addition, he has authored a number of journal articles on the Bible and archaeology, most available through academia.edu. So welcome to the program, Dr. David Graves. And our topic today, I see the ziggurat behind you. I hope I didn't give that away. A spoiler if people didn't know. Are you still in Canada? I didn't know they had ziggurats in Canada, but
No, they don't have ziggurats anywhere here, but this is one of the ziggurats in ancient Ur. It's been partially reconstructed. We're going to be talking about these today. They're fascinating structures, and they have a connection to the Bible, possibly, that is fun and always interesting to talk about.
Yeah, are you going to go into the history? I'm just curious of when the ziggurat behind you was reconstructed, or no?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. So,
all right.
So this is the AI recreation of what it might have looked like, second millennium BC. Takes lots of liberties, but it's got the general idea, concept there correct. It's materials found in my book on the archaeology of the Old Testament. I do a small section on ziggurats. However, I have a good friend of mine that we dug at Shiloh together, Dr. Matt Glassman. He did his PhD at Yale on ziggurats, and he's visited them all and done his entire PhD on it. So he was my go-to person to get some of the information. I've traveled the Middle East quite extensively through Israel and Egypt and up here in Turkey, Anatolia. The one place I didn't go because of safety reasons, it's just more difficult to get there, was Iran and Iraq, to visit cities of Ur and Akkad and Nineveh. But I relied on Matt's information a lot for sort of primary, my go-to guy. I did a podcast with him here a few weeks ago on this material. So we have the ziggurat here at Ur, Tel El-Makayr, and then we have some up here in Nineveh as well. They're mentioned in the Enuma Elish tablet. And then you have in Saqqara over in Egypt, you have these pyramids, which are structured kind of similar to them. And then at Uruk, they have one here, the remains. All that remains of most of these today is just the bottoms, because the mud brick is all deteriorated. And then there's one here at Nippur as well. They built a a modern structure on the top of it. And then there's one at Nimrod, which remains there. They were discovered in 1625, the one at Ur. This is where Abraham was from, although there is another Ur up in the northern part of Mesopotamia that some suggest is Ur, but that's a whole other debate. But this individual valet, he was the first to discover it. And then Loftus excavated Ur in 1849. And then Henry Rawlinson, here's the younger Rawlinson and the older Rawlinson, identified it as the city of Ur from the inscribed bricks. Now, all of these ziggurats were made with mud brick, and we have some of them preserved. And they're not like the mud bricks we think of. They're square, and they have an inscription. They stamp the name of the pharaoh, not the pharaoh, sorry, the king on the top of them, like Nebuchadnezzar or one of the kings that were ruling at the time. Sir Charles Woolley excavated in 1922 and 1934, and here we have this bull's head, beautiful gold and lapis lazuli, that's the blue, ivory and carnelian, from the tomb of Puabi, dating from about 2500 BC. And they discovered temples and a cemetery known as the Royal Graves and residential tombs and houses. And they also discovered the great ziggurat, dedicated to the moon god Nana. Some of the folks that worked at Ur were Leonard Woolley and Max Mallowan and Agatha Christie and T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. So they were all there working together. In fact, Agatha Christie married Max Mallowan. It was her second marriage, and she went and faked the death of her husband because he wouldn't give her a divorce back in England. So he finally capitulated after he was charged with trying to kill her. She staged it. And then she ended up going on the Orient Express, traveled across, stopped at Ur, met Max Mallowan, fell in love with him, and they got married, and she stayed there and became quite an eminent archaeologist in her own right. And of course, all those famous books that came out of Death on the Nile and all those murder mysteries that talk about archaeology came from her firsthand experience in the dig at Ur. So I digress a little bit from ziggurats, but they discovered this ziggurat that's behind my head. It's been partially restored, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but they found that at Ur. What we need to realize as well is that every city had a ziggurat. There's not just one of them. And of course, the connection that often people make is to the Tower of Babel. All of the artifacts are preserved in the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania Museum, and they have significance because they give us an idea of the social and cultural background of the time of Abraham. Now, I want to talk a little bit about brick building. According to the Bible, brick building technology began early in history of civilization. Genesis 11:3 says it started in Sumer or Shinar, 4000 BC, so very, very early. Likely under the direction of Nimrod, that possibly Gilgamesh, Genesis chapter 10, verses 9 and 10. The technology was very different from the boulder and chink method used in Palestine, where they would take big boulders and they put smaller pieces of stone in between them as filler, hold it all together. It's called boulder and chink construction. But brick building was established very, very early in civilization, and it was used to create these large step structures called ziggurats. And the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation, describes the use of this brick technology in the construction of Babylon. I'm holding a piece of the Enuma Elish in my hand there from the British Museum. Here it is here. I'm holding the top piece there on the left. They held the bricks together using a bitumen, and here we have some pictures of it. It's basically tar, chunks of tar, same things we make our asphalt from. So it can be understood as asphalt. they heat it up, and they would use that to stick it together, and it would hold it in place. Walton describes the technology of baked bricks as an ancient trade developed toward the end of the 4th millennium. The resulting product used bitumen as a mastic, proved to be waterproof, and also to keep it sturdy as stone. Since it was an expensive process as well, it was only used for important public buildings, such as the ziggurats. Now here is a reconstruction. I like this. The Maiden Project has some great photographs. And here's a reconstruction of the Tower of Babel, which really gives you a great idea. You can see the steps that are going up to the top. The one at was 3 stories high. We know that from the inscribed records. The tablets record it. Some of them actually were up as high as 7 stories in some of the centers, according to the descriptions. And then at the very top, they would have a temple, and the temple would be dedicated to the gods, and the priests would go up there and do their business. Some speculate that there was the cult of prostitution was going on. There was a bed up there, but that's all just speculation. But the thing to note is that no one lived at the top, that this was a temple ceremonial structure on the very top. And so they had mud bricks, which were then covered with baked bricks. The baked bricks were the ones that were harder, and this preserved it and kept its structure for a long time. The mud bricks were made out of mud and reed, and the reed was pressed in the molds that gave it its stability, and then they were sun-dried. Each brick measured about 25 by 16 by 7. Now, they varied somewhat. They were traditionally about 4.5 kilograms, and many of them were square. Here's a mold from Hatshepsut's temple from the foundation deposit. You can see there the mold. We actually used one of these molds at Tel el-Hammam and made some mud bricks to reinforce our structures where we were digging. We wanted to use the same kind of materials as they used in antiquity. This one's from the Met Museum. You can see the hieroglyphs here on the side with the cartouche with the name of the pharaoh. That's when we know it's this guy's. So they look similar to this. The Tower of Babel was a building. Now the term Tower of Babel doesn't appear in the biblical text. This is probably something a lot of people don't know. We always hear people talking about the Tower of Babel. It's not mentioned specifically in the scripture, but they built a city with a tower. Later, the text explains that, therefore, its city name was called Babel. That is a Babylonian with a play on the words Belal, perhaps meaning to mix or confuse. Matt Glassman challenged that. He wanted to say that it was from 2 words, Bab and El. He translated it as being up to the gods. El is the name for God. That could be it as well. Because there, the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord dispersed them over the face of all the earth. So there's a connection to the scattering of people, the scattering of languages, confusion of language at this time period. Here's the medieval image of what they thought the Tower of Babel looked like. I always kind of laugh at that one a little bit because they consider it to be round. Although Matt did tell me there was some that were partly round. So that was kind of interesting. I didn't know that. Here's another reconstruction. The important thing to point out here is that the ziggurat was always in the center of the city, and that there was a temple complex. You can see that in the blue walls that surround the ziggurat, because it was a sacred space, and they would put that in the center of their cities. And the river here, probably the Tigris or Euphrates, that they're showing what it looked like. And there is an AI reconstruction of one a little taller, but like I said, there were some that had 7 stories, so they're not far off on that. And you see the steps going up. Most ziggurat scholars suggest the Tower of Babel was a ziggurat, and I think they're probably correct. I don't think it was any particular one, but the concept of this idea of building a structure or tower up to the heavens where they could reach God, because the temple at the top was closer to God, and so they built it up. And there were some 32 to 34 ziggurats that Matt Lastman had identified in his dissertation in the Tigris-Euphrates basin. So this whole area, every major city had a ziggurat. And the earliest dates to the reign of Ur-Nammu, 2047 to 2030 BC, in the cities of Ur and Nippur and Uruk as well. So, and Matt had visited all of them, and I had had some photographs of them. Here's the photograph by Dr. Bryant Wood of what it looked like before it had been reconstructed. One of the most famous is this one here at a place called E Temen An Kai. And the Sumerian, it means temple of the foundation of heaven and earth. And it was dedicated to Marduk. The Akkadian for ziggurat is Zigguratu. And this man-made brick structure, was built by Ur-Nammu, and it rose to 3 stories, was accessible by a prominent staircase, as I mentioned. It contained a temple at the top. We already talked about that. Built to the house and worship of the god of heaven, Nergal, Nana, and Sin. Those were the names of their gods. And I said no priest resided in the structure. It was rebuilt by Nabopolassar and Nebuchadnezzar II in the 6th century BC, according to Herodotus and Josephus, which was kind of interesting. So they maintained them. They kept them going. Today, this is what it looks like. The ziggurat is here in the horizon. Palace foundations are in the foreground with the ziggurat in the distance here. So today, that's what it looks like. There is another photograph. The buildings here in the foreground, these are modern, not modern, but newer. You can tell by the arches, they don't date back to the same time period. Saddam Hussein wanted to become the next Nebuchadnezzar II and decided that he was going to reconstruct the ziggurat. And he built a lot of these and restored a lot of these later structures in the area. Alexander the Great attempted to rebuild the decaying ruins by moving the structure brick by brick, if you can imagine. Unfortunately, he died before completing the project. And all that remains today is the base. But then Saddam Hussein came along and tried to restore it. And as I said, it was excavated by Woolley. Perrault believed that this ziggurat was the Tower of Babel. He's done the translation of some of this material. So here's the before and the after, the ziggurat before construction, and by Nabopolassar, Nebuchadnezzar, and Alexander the Great. And the one on the right is the one as it was restored by Saddam Hussein in 1993 to 2003. This is what it looks like from the ground level. Now, what I think is really important is the connection we have in Genesis 28. And he dreamed Jacob's ladder, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the step of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. So during the Iraqi war, here are some American soldiers climbing the stairs to heaven. Hopefully not literally. And there we have the foundation base brick building of the one that had been taken apart in Borispa So this is one of the other ones. Now, Harris and other Old Testament scholars argue that Etemenatki influences the biblical story of the Tower of Babel during the Babylonian captivity of the Hebrews. Other scholars refer to Ezekiel, the Borispa one, although this opinion is less likely. And as I said, I don't think it was any particular tower that was referred to as the Tower of Babel. They're excavating the city of Babel. The one that existed looks possibly like this at this location. And there's another one in Borispa. We have a tablet that talks about these as well. A Sumerian tablet called the Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata, 2000 BC, provides a compiling parallel with the Tower of Babel account in Genesis. In those days of yore, when the destinies were determined, the great prince allowed Iana, that is the temple or ziggurat of Anna, to lift its head high. Plenty and carp floods, fish aplenty, barley abundance, and the rain which brought forth dappled barley were then increased in Inug Kulaba. I don't speak Sumerian, and they sure use difficult words to pronounce. So before the land of Dilmun yet existed, the Iana of Enug Kulaba were well founded. The tablet also provides an account of a time when the human language spoke one language. Humankind only spoke one tongue. And there was no fear, no terror in those days. The land Marku resting in security, the whole universe, the people in unison in Enlil, in one tongue. Enki, the god, the Lord of wisdom, changed the speech in their mouths, contention into it, into the speech of man that until then has been one. So their account that we have in this Sumerian version parallels the description we have in Genesis about one language and the language being confused. So I think is really interesting. So there's so many parallels with a tower leading up to heaven, a staircase leading up to heaven, and then we have the confusion of tongues in their own writings as well. So although there's no parallels with the Tower of Babel account, the confusion of language by a deity is an ancient theme, and in the Sumerian text, the confusion of language was the result of rivalry between the gods Enki and Enlil, and had nothing to do with the tower specifically. In Genesis, the issue was between God and the people over the building of a tower. So it's kind of interesting the difference there in the stories. But the major themes are running through both. I just want to, for a second, talk about this. There's the pyramid at Saqqara. I was there at Saqqara, so I did see this one. Also called a mastaba. And there's an article right there if you wanted to read further on them. But I find it really interesting that the Egyptians also were building these towers. They were for funeral purposes, not the same kinds as was found in Babylon. But they used bricks as well. Mastaba, Arabic meaning bench, because it looks like a stepped bench. That was used in the pre-dynastic period and the early dynastic period of Egypt for the pharaohs. And they were built of brick for the pharaoh Dezor in 2630. There's a statue of him. So here's a repeat of some of the places where we find all of these. And there's the ziggurat there at Nafur, modern construction, American archaeologists. This is probably where they were working and had built it to protect the structure itself while they were doing some excavations. Emerson, Eridu. That's my presentation on ziggurats found in Mesopotamia.
We're talking about archaeology, but this one is kind of difficult because we look at the biblical narrative, which makes the ziggurat at least known and popular to those that read the scriptural narrative, what we would call the Old Testament or the Torah, if you will, to the Jewish population. I think, and this is just my opinion, that how many people knew before Dr. Graves did this presentation that there was an older, I shouldn't say, what date was that cuneiform from that you just read that actually mentioned God, the Babylonian, in that case, a god of gods in Babylonian, of course,
Are the languages?
dispersed the languages. Yeah, that was fascinating. That I thought, like, you know what? We do have different versions, like the Epic of Gilgamesh for the flood. That's obvious. I think a lot of people know that, right?
Yeah.
How many people knew what you just said about the one language deal?
Yeah.
Wow,
No,
that's
probably
pretty cool.
not too many. Yeah, I was surprised by that. Having seen that, it was quite illuminating. The date on that is 3000 BC. That's the alabaster image there, statue. I actually don't have the date on that
Oh, that's
text,
fine.
but they could
But just
simply Google it, En Makar and the Lord of Eratah.
so that's the assignment for this week.
Oh,
Let's
it's
find out more
2000.
about that tablet.
I've got it. It's on my previous slide, 2000 BC.
Okay. So I thought because you mentioned the diaspora, and for the Jewish people, that's when the Babylonian, during the time of King Nebuchadnezzar, he attacked the Jewish cities and Jerusalem, and then take the inhabitants uh, into Babylon. So we call that a diaspora.
Yeah. And
All
it
right.
ranges anywhere from 1900 to 1600 BC. So
Oh,
I rounded off around 2000 BC. Um,
okay.
I've got a photograph of it there. You want me to share that again, or?
No, I just think it's interesting because you know when would the Jews pick up? And this is just a hypothesis. When would the population of Judea, if they're going to pick up that epic of their story of the Tower of Babel or the dispersion of languages?
Well, you
So
have
this,
to realize, Abraham comes from this region,
oh, that's true too, isn't it? He
and
comes
so
from.
he travels up to Haran and then down into the land, the promised land. God tells him to, pick up his things and go, and so he does in faith and ends up in a different area land. But he brings with him the oral tradition of his family, so all of that is with him. And then God gives the accounts in Genesis when those are written by Moses later. But he speaks to them in the context of the culture in which they lived, and that I think is important. So they would have this in their consciousness. They would understand this idea because it came from a common theme. It came from a common root. So Abraham experienced it, and the Babylonians experienced it, and then God, of course, tells them the story in Genesis. But the Babylonians, Sumerians also have their story that they tell in the context of their gods and their culture there.
All right. That's well.
So that's my
That,
explanation. I'm sticking to it.
it, I like that's a yeah. That's my story, and I'm stuck with it.
Yeah.
So, but there was an instance where Jacob has a vision, and it says he saw angels ascending and descending, as if it were the translation. I think it's like a staircase. Others might say it's a ladder. But you know what's
It's
interesting,
actually,
right there? Go
I,
ahead.
I actually looked up the Hebrew word on that. It's stair. It's not ladder. The ESV says ladder, but it's not. It's stair, staircase, stairway. And that's the Hebrew
Okay,
that's
well,
used there.
stairway would be safer.
Yeah, I think they have A They have a footnote in the ESV that says stairway, but that is the Hebrew. Matt Glassman and I looked it up when we were doing our presentation, so that's why I know what it is. I didn't put it there, but
when anybody takes a trip to Israel, we always go to the Israel Museum, but there's another museum that's pretty extensive next to it, and it's called the Bible Lands Museum.
yeah.
Fantastic collection there as well. And I think it's owned, or it's a nonprofit that was established through a very wealthy antiquity dealer.
Yeah.
And they had a huge selection of not scarabs, but seals. Seals are the ones people that they actually roll. I got one in the showcase, but it's I can't get it right now. But they'd roll it and it'd leave the impression just as you would like a seal that would be on your ring. But this one was cool because when you wrote, what they did is they gave the impression, right? They had like a little, remember that silly putty we had years ago? They had something that seems like silly putty, and they rolled it down on there.
Yeah.
And this was it, so it showed an individual, okay, and a ziggurat, and he was climbing, and it had the ladder leaning up against the ziggurat. So I was just thinking, like, well, there's a combination of two. So the idea of a ladder and stairways and a ziggurat, I guess people basically think the same, you know. But I thought that was fascinating when I saw it.
Here's one of the bricks with the name of Nebuchadnezzar on it. This is from the Royal Imperial Museum. And they have thousands of them. There's tons of these things around. But this is one of the actual bricks that would have been used in a structure similar to the ziggurat. I didn't put it in my presentation, but you can see it there. Now, can you see it?
Yeah, actually, we have one in the collection. I couldn't get it. It's coming.
Yeah, and they're quite large, but
they're quite large. Yes.
Yeah, but this is what one of the bricks that was used, and they would stamp it here in the center with the name of of Nebuchadnezzar and talking about his exploits and all the fun stuff he had done. So,
yep, they're pretty hard. They're pretty sturdy.
Yeah.
The one that is in the museum collection, it actually mentions like, well, when you're dealing with the gods and goddesses, they're always have an idea of fertility. You're worshiping a deity for a reason, and it's usually fertility. So in this one was a stamp, and there was a blessing by the king and the gods for crop, for the abundance of crop.
Yeah.
And of course, it was a part of the structure of the ziggurat. So, we used to, I don't want to make it seem like what we do in Christianity in some cases stems from paganism. I just think that sometimes we as people have the same idea as being or wanting to be in the presence of a deity. I like the way the British say it, deity. This is part of my deity, and I'm a devotee.
Yeah.
But they call it intercessory. You ever heard of the intercessory prayer or an intercessory type of item, a votive item? So they leave it behind somewhere close to the altar.
Now, David wrote many intercessory prayers and psalms. Yeah.
Right. So these bricks that were incorporated into a ziggurat was a form of intercessory to be there in the presence of that deity, all piled up, saying like, like this is what we're praying for. It could be crops, it could be cattle, it could be family, it could be peace, it could be a lot of different things.
Yeah.
So here you have thousands and thousands of prayers going up to a deity. Maybe no different than in some ways. We do too. Like, how does the farmer is praying for a sunny day or a rainy day? Farmer prays for the rainy day, and I'm praying for the sunny day because I got a picnic. So I come in how many bricks are like that too. Give me this, but wait a minute, give me that. But that is interesting. Thanks for showing us that brick, because it is a part of the structures of the ziggurats.
Yes, and what's
Yes.
interesting is that we have many of them, and we have all the different names of the kings who ruled from that time period with their names on it. So we have Nebuchadnezzar II, his name on there. It's mentioned in scripture. So it's a confirmation of the historicity of these individuals who are named in the scripture that we now have etched in stone, or in mud brick in this case, telling us that they existed. They're true historical individuals. So I think that's pretty cool.
That is cool. If we venture off for a little bit on this, and it said that they had one mind, one accord, and they came together to build a tower unto heaven. And God was somehow displeased with this, or they could just, if they get together, they could just expand, I guess, and nothing will be impossible for them. So God confused the language. In the Babylonian case, maybe the deities got together and confused the language for the devotees. But in confusing the language, you know what? We could take it very literal, but I'm just going to throw something out there for the fun of it, okay? And hear me now and hate me later. So, yeah, we could take a very literal approach and say that the language was confused. But what about the idea of a church split? You know, I'm no longer a Baptist, I'm a Lutheran, or I'm not a Lutheran, now I'm a Catholic. And we do change in the way we understand, you could say, our religious beliefs.
Or you may just want to have a church that grows to the point where it wants to set up a satellite church. And so and I think in the sense of the Old Testament, God told them, I want you to multiply and disperse. And I want you, they were all gathered in one area. I want you to disperse throughout the land. And so he sends, Abraham to go to the promised land, a land that he would show him, give him. We have Moses traveling from Egypt back into, through the Sinai. So we have Christians moving around different regions. They're not just supposed to all be sticking together in one tribe. God wants us to go out and multiply and to the four corners of the earth. That's the charge of the Great Commission, isn't it?
Okay. Yes, it is.
Go into all the world.
Interesting. So, we just stepped into theology.
Yeah, we did.
That's dangerous.
To be honest, I can't separate the two. So, I'm also a theologian, and so to bring the two of them together, I think that the archaeology helps us to understand our theology sometimes.
Right.
That's its purpose.
Yeah. But I just threw that out there for a different, like a different way to handle. Do you take it literal? Do you take it like a metaphorical, or is it a combination of both?
Yeah.
It's also interesting that different languages usually go along with different belief systems, such as, what about those that speak Hebrew? What about those that speak Arabic? What about those that speak Chinese? What about those that speak Japanese? Don't they also have a certain religious format that goes along with the language that can be vastly different?
I'm fascinated by watching some of these videos online now of these polyglots. These people that there's one guy on there that speaks I think 27 different languages, and challenges people to come up to him and speak a language that he doesn't know. So he can speak Russian and Spanish and Italian and Chinese, and that's amazing how he could speak all these different languages. My wife is actually one of them. She can speak so many different languages: Portuguese and Russian and English and French and Arabic. And so I just amazed at some of these. I can hardly remember my last name.
If you can't speak languages, just be an archaeologist.
Yeah. So it's really quite amazing how people can speak all these different languages. But God, at the one point, they all spoke one language, and they wanted them to disperse and and confounded the languages. So they had to speak different languages. And I think it's a bit of an oversimplification to take it just strictly literally. I think there's an element there of God sending a message on a deeper
Yeah,
level.
I think that's a safe way to put it. Because I was just thinking, like, here you have the ziggurats. Okay, what came first, the chicken or the egg? The ziggurat or the pyramid?
Yeah,
What came first, the culture of the Egyptians or that of the Babylonians to Sumeria?
yeah,
Sumerian.
yeah.
So, yes, uh, maybe cuneiform. I think, wow. What's the curator I just had on the program talking about Irving Finkel, right?
Yeah,
I think we had a brief thing. What came first, the cuneiform or the hieroglyphs? I think he said the cuneiform came first.
yeah, I would say that
But
too.
but
I think definitely
anyway,
so.
so it is pretty fascinating. It isn't just reading the verse very, very quickly in Genesis and saying, "Oh, and God confused the languages because He didn't like what was going on." I mean, there could be a lot of stuff when we think about it. Like, why did it happen, and where did it happen, and did it happen like we believe, like just a language, or
But the
uh,
Sumerians had their story that
mhm.
they understood in their tradition, in their oral tradition. Um, and of course, then we have the biblical account. They both trace back to the original events that took place, and now they're describing them in the language and in terms of the cultural context that they were living in. So with Yahweh, and then with we have the Jewish, the Hebrew understanding of it, and then we have the Sumerian understanding of it. But they all trace back to a common root, same as the creation epics, same as the flood epics. And here we have the confused language epic.
Yeah, that is interesting. Now, I could just see a critic, and there's nothing wrong with being critic. You can be critic and be critical, and still after everybody disagrees, still everybody goes out to lunch if that's possible. But uh, being critical, that you can say, did it come from the same point, or are they sharing literature? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And I could just see a critical thinker saying, no, what they're really doing is sharing literature. Like, this one picks up because of their contact, maybe of trade, maybe some being in those areas, and they understand because of the literature, the epic event being written down, and they bring it and they incorporate it.
yeah.
You know what? Uh, and
But what
I
I
would like. Go
what
ahead.
I what I argue with these kinds of things is that that's a valid hypothesis, but my hypothesis is just as valid.
Well, that's a good word to
And
put in, hypothesis.
that's what you can't prove it one way or the other. All you can come up with is a hypothesis. So pays yours money and takes yours choice.
Well, that's
And
true, but
we come at
it's not.
these, and which hypothesis you take generally is influenced by your presuppositions and by your bias. And I say there's no neutrality. Everybody has a bias. And
Very good.
so let's just be honest with our bias. Of course, my bias is that the biblical account is true and historical and accurate, and that I see these ancient Near Eastern stories as supporting that hypothesis. So
Yeah.
to say one is more valid than the other is, I think, unwise. We need to make sure that we acknowledge, where we're coming from, our biases, and that one
Very good.
hypothesis is just as valid as the other as far as logic and reason is concerned.
Right. I just wanted to throw that out there, Doctor, just to let the listening audience know that we're aware of these different biases and to bring it out
Sure.
and to say we understand the I'll say the same word you did, hypothesis. Hypothesis of it coming from literature, hypothesis coming from the actual history. Well, okay, we're aware of that. And to bring it out in the open, I think is very academically honest and
Yeah.
where it should be. And
And one is just as valid as the other.
that's very fair. That's the part that gets everybody to go to lunch together.
Yeah, sure.
But very interesting. I just find it fascinating on different levels, especially when you brought out that they did have a similar epic in a very ancient, you could say, document. Uh, that was, I wonder just how many people actually realize that, and that's
Yeah.
very cool. You go to a lecture and you get one or two things out of it that you never knew before. To me, it's well worth it. It's well
Yeah.
worth it. And we were talking about Dr. Gary Byers, how he did a lecture before we started this program. And he's talking about it's now on YouTube. So if you want to see, it's about the tomb of Beni Hassan, a very popular tomb from in Egypt. And in his lecture, he just talked about a number of different things. And I say there's one or two things that I didn't know that I can use to create another YouTube video just on that one subject. It was really, really cool. And I see the same thing here with with yeah, we understand what the Bible says and the ziggurat, but the little things that we didn't know can be expounded on. And it's very well worth it.
Maybe sometime we could do the all the discoveries from the tomb that they discovered at
Ooh.
Ur that are in
Oh
the British
wow,
Museum.
that's like the Mesopotamian King Tut.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's pretty incredible the things we have there. So that would be worth walking through all of those discoveries of the helmet from solid gold,
Yes,
from
yes,
the harp, the lyre, the silver lyre, and all the stuff that Sir Leonard Woolley and that crew pulled out um, of the grave. So
right.
that's another one we could do.
Yeah, very interesting stuff. And at one time, didn't become kind of he made his excavation popular in a respect that he at one time claimed that he found evidence of the flood. Did he not?
Yeah, yeah, he did. Yeah,
So the whole thing's very really this.
and
It's a lot of fun.
there's no direct evidence to associate Abraham specifically to this location, but
Um,
he used it to raise funds back in England because he has to
yeah,
dig.
right. And the thing is that honestly, it's difficult to raise funds for excavations,
Yeah,
especially people don't understand just the academics. So if we said, oh, late Bronze Age or Iron Age, that means nothing
yeah.
to most
But
people.
people are still doing the exact same thing today with their
Yes,
YouTube
yes.
channels. They do it for clicks.
Oh, absolutely. And then it's the same. Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, we have to talk in a way that's going to be interesting for the people, or they're not going to tune in.
Yeah,
It'll be too boring. And like we said, if we said Iron Age, or let's say late Bronze Age, I said, oh, the late Bronze Age, 1550 to 1200 BC, people are going to go, oh, I need some more
yeah,
coffee. But I say, oh, it's a time period of the Exodus and Moses, right?
yeah,
And let my people go. And we're going to talk about which Pharaoh was the Pharaoh of the Exodus. We like to fight about that. And then, when the conquest happened, or did the conquest happen at all? Like, and then people listen in because now it reaches them at a different level. So it's no longer just 1550 to 1200 BC.
yeah, yeah. And
And we got to do that.
that's why I mentioned Abraham and to bring him into it because it puts it into a biblical
Yeah.
context for us and we can get our head around that. But if I say 3000 BC, they have no idea where that is, sits in time really.
Right. And it is so we can understand because we said Sir Leonard Woolley did certain things to draw attention, to bring funds to his excavation. Well, if you don't talk a certain way, I'm going to say to the laity, they're not going to be interested and they're not going to fund the dig and nothing's going to get done
Yeah,
unless you have a very wealthy backer. But you know where the wealthy backers come from? Usually they're the ones that are sitting amongst the laity in there too. They're the laity too. And they come out and say, boy, I'm really fascinated with it. Then they back it. I could talk about one individual that helped Steve for quite a long time. His name was, of course, John Mancini. Did a
hmm
lot for that. But the thing is that it's there, it happens, and I say sometimes things get exaggerated a little bit too, just to bring about the we call it clickbait, right? Now we say
Yeah,
clickbait.
that's
We throw out the clickbait, brings them in, and then you bring it down into a perspective. I've seen that go on as well.
yeah, yeah.
But
And so we put titles on our videos to draw people in so they'd be
uh,
interested in looking at it. So yeah, call it clickbait, but um, as long as you're not being untruthful, it's just,
right.
you can be
Now we
sensational.
you did a cute one the other day, and Holly is the one that does some of the editing for Bible Interact. And if you notice some of the intro slides, Dr. Grave is doing it. I mean, he's just fantastic with these with his AI and how he puts this together and comes up with these scenes. And he had one intro slide. I'm ratting on you here, and it had a picture of him. And I said, I texted him back. I said, well, what if you put an attractive lady on the front of them? So here comes the two more. Part one, part two, both have, it's an AI generated female. I don't think it's somebody you know.
No,
I don't know. But anyway, and here comes the slide with this, she's wearing the archaeological garb. She's like a female Indiana Jones. And I said, wow, that's really, really cute, you know? Whether it
well,
has something to do with the video or not, who knows? When you get in there, it's the two old guys.
but what the audience should know is that both of our wives have dug with us on our dig sites and are good archaeologists in their own right. So there's lots of ladies that are out there. So, why not put a lady on the cover? I had an old guy with a beard, but originally, but I thought, well, let's mix it up a little bit and make it, and it's not being unauthentic. It's very authentic. If you're on these dig sites, there's many, many ladies that are working, um, probably half and half, I think 50-50. And in my experience at Tel El Hammam over the years and at Shiloh. So it's, and we've got a couple of them. We've got one lady, Abigail, she's doing her PhD in archaeology right now and Tel Aviv University. Hope she's okay. I hear they bombed it yesterday, but there's lots of good females out there doing the work. And our assistant dig director at Tel El Hammam was Carol Cobes. She used to be a stewardess for a major airline. She retired and went on and did her PhD in archaeology. So
Right, right. And
and
then
Agatha Christie and
right. Kathleen
Gertrude
Kenyon.
Bell and some
Right.
historical figures, Kathleen Kenyon. So, why not put a lady on the cover?
You were just talking about, got a lot of hits too, a lot of attention. The Palace of David.
Mm-hmm.
Elat Mazar, is that it? Elat
Eilat,
Mazar?
Eilat Mazar, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, just to name a few female out there. And then there's a book that I love, um, the book on pottery. It was made back in the 1960s, and I think a lot of people still use it. What? I can't think of the name of it right now. Who wrote that book on
Amnon,
pottery? Huh?
Amnon.
And she did one on scarabs, a nice one on scarabs. Adnan Bentur's wife, is that the one?
That might be
Uh,
the one.
and then
I
there's
know the one you're talking about. I have it on my shelf here. It's
yeah, I got it too. That's
Ruth Amaron.
Ruth Amaran. Who doesn't have a Ruth Amaran? If you've been in archaeology anytime, you got a copy of Ruth Amaran. Matter of fact, I got three.
Yeah, it's a
That's
standard work for pottery. But
yeah,
in my book on the history of biblical archaeology, I have a whole raft of these ladies that are famous archaeologists in there. So you can read all about them and it's fascinating stories and really good read. So why not put a lady on the cover?
right, right. Absolutely. Now, once again, I'll just hold up one of your books right here because I do keep them around. Archaeology of the New Testament. Right?
Yes.
And then, of course, the one that all the videos are out now. Jesus speaks to the seven churches.
Yep. The best commentary on the seven churches available in English today.
And then we have Digging Up the Bible.
Yep, that's been selling quite well, actually. This month, I think I sold 20 some.
You know, we got thousands of church. These books right here, they're not that expensive. You know what? And
most of my books are available in paperback as well as hardcover. So if you
Biblical
want one,
Archaeology.
if you
So
want,
all these books I just threw at everybody, and all kinds of great illustrations in there. I know I got my scenery in the background, kinds of messes it up, but
yeah,
if you just flip through these things, you're going to find. I'm not even looking. I got backed up for the camera,
and
so
some of
doing
them are
everything
black and
remote.
white, and some of them are in color. So you can get a
Mhm.
paperback in black and white. You can get if it's a lot cheaper than going with the color. If you can't afford the color ones. But if you want to have a reference work, you can get the hardcover. They're not usually that much more, a few dollars more to get the hardcover, but yeah, I tried to price them as close as I could. Although Amazon, they get their price on there, and um, a lot of it goes to the printer and to Amazon. I get very little off my books, but they're print on demand, so I can provide them whenever anybody wants one.
So yeah, so I got my selection, and you've got a couple more out there that I'm going to get. But anyway, once again,
35.
we rambled on for a while here, but I think sharing a lot of good information with the general public, that the scenery, what goes on behind an excavation, the funds and how they need to be drawn, from the laity. So this is the way the world is, and but with that aside, people, if you get a chance, be sure and go ahead and get the David's books, and get a collection for your house as a resource material. If you want to, you can follow along as we keep on going and doing these podcasts. We're going to have podcasts that are going to correspond with the books that he has as well. So there's a lot of good information out there.
Yeah.
David, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate that. And I'll see you again next week. And one more thing, I almost forgot. Hey, thanks for subscribing, everybody. We have been going up, believe it or not, the last couple of weeks, almost a month now, 1,000 people a day. You believe that? 1,000 subscribers a day. So once again, I appreciate that, and we want to keep on putting up really good content for everybody. So thank you for your time. I'm going to sign off, and then probably get in touch with Jody Magnus about being on a program next week. All right, sir. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, George.